Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rushing the Field, national college football show from NBC Sports. You can also watch us on NBC Sports YouTube page. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach, and it is time for our last game preview episode of the entire season. We have made it to the final Monday night national championship game, Ohio State, Notre Dame, for all the marbles. Joshua, I don't think you could have asked for anything better than this. Two of the biggest brands in the history of the sport. So many compelling stories, the losses that these teams have had to overcome to get here. Like, this is a win for those of us who love narratives in college football.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. As you mentioned, like narratives everywhere in terms of players, coaches, the programs themselves, the history that's involved there, but also like watching this iteration of the college football playoff, the path Ohio State had to take, Tennessee, Oregon, beating Texas, and then say what you want about Notre Dame, but Georgia, I think, was seen by many as one of the best teams in college football all year long. And they get that win against them to make it to a national championship. In playing Penn State in the semifinal, too, no disrespect to Nittany Lions because they were a top 5 team all year long. It also feels like we're getting ready to watch the two best teams in college football based off of the path that they had to take to get to the national championship.
Yeah, it's weird thinking about it in bracket form because these were the 7 and 8 seeds.
Mm-hmm.
That's not exactly what they were, right? Like from an at-large standpoint, they would have been a little bit higher up, but they are teams that wouldn't have been in this if it wasn't a 12-team playoff. And I think that's really important, Joshua, because we talk a lot about your team in 2014 winning it as the number 4 seed, the first year of the 4-team playoff. I think that immediately validated that model because it showed, okay, there's more than 2 teams that should play for this. Like, you might miss the best team in the country because they had an early loss. And it's kind of this way now as well. Obviously, Ohio State's bad loss is a Michigan loss right at the end of the regular season. But these are teams that wouldn't have been in there because of that second loss for Ohio State, because of the loss for Notre Dame. They basically usually had to be perfect to make the 4-team field. To this, I think, I don't know, someone had an issue with me saying like it validated this new model, but I think it's kind of like one of the best case scenarios for it in year one, because it now is teaching us, okay, you can lose in September, you could even lose to a MAC team, but if you get it together after that, if you play really well after that, you can access this, you have a chance, you can win your way through this bracket. Like, it doesn't matter the hypotheticals. It doesn't matter if your regular season ended rough. Like, you have a chance to prove your worth on the field. And I think that is something that's really valuable for this, even though, yes, of course, it's the big brands that are going to get the mulligans, that are going to get these extra chances, like Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, all of those types of teams that had flaws this year got chances to play for it. But again, it's still like, by the time you get to this point and you had to win 3 tough games to get here, it's hard to have any issue with the teams that are playing in it because they really did earn their way to the national championship game.
Yeah, that's the last part is the part for me that makes me feel okay with it. And I said this at the beginning of the playoff with this bracket, but like, I do think it's odd that we're looking at the number 4 team in the Big Ten in terms of standings playing for the national title. And I did struggle and still do struggle with this idea of how certain things have to be disqualifying in the regular season to me, right? Not necessarily being a 2-loss team should be disqualifying, but if one of your losses is to a team that was barely bowl eligible, like, I think there is a conversation about like, do you even deserve the opportunity to compete for a championship? But the field is the field. And based off of the paths, I do think it's hard for people to make the argument about how good teams are, right? Like, you could say, oh, they should have never been there. That's a different discussion.
Yeah,
but they won the games,
best.
right? Like, you gotta win 3 games to make it to a title game. Like, you probably deserve to be in there.
So I was having this argument on the radio with another former Buckeye, Ben Hartsock, about like the difficultness of the path. So he was arguing that he thinks in a past era, when he won a national championship, it was harder because you basically had to be perfect all regular season, and then you had the one game to go and win it. And I was arguing that like the amount of games you have to win when you're banged up, when, depth is so important, and all of that in the current model is harder. Where do you stand on that of like the pressure of perfection in the regular season versus like the actual teams you have to beat over and over and over again to win in this model?
No, I'm definitely saying the old way is
harder?
is yes,
Okay.
because you could eliminate yourself by the third week, right? Like, I think that there are a lot of people who their mentality, and look at what Oregon did, right? Like, if this was a BCS, Oregon would have been in a much better spot. What they did in the regular season, like, getting to that point, and then you get into the postseason, all of a sudden somebody can come out of the woodwork. Ryan Day talked about it, but it's like, just give us a chance to get into the thing. And I think it's very easy to compartmentalize at that point, like, this is what we have to do. I do think going undefeated in the regular season, I've said before, like, not the most important thing, not the hardest thing, because you can, we see teams do it just about every year. But with the shorter postseason, I do think it became a little bit more difficult to have to stack everything on top during the regular season. Now there's only a couple teams that are viable. When Hartsock was playing, I mean, you had to have a lot of things go right, and the computers had to like you at that point. Like, I thought that was difficult. Now I think, especially with some of the paths that we saw, like, you could give yourself a chance if you make it into the tournament.
True. So as we look at Monday night, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman, Ryan Day, two coaches who neither of them have a national championship. They're joining the club. They will be the third active head coach with a national championship, joining Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney, because there's been a little bit of an exodus. We lost Nick Saban's titles. We lost Mac Brown, who was forced out at North Carolina. There's, Riley Leonard. There's Jack Sawyer coming off his hero moment at the Cotton Bowl. There's so many interesting storylines. What big picture compels you the most about this matchup?
Well, I think it is the idea of these coaches and, like, what we're going to say after the game ends, right? Regardless of what the outcome is. For Ryan Day, I was one of those people where I said I had seen enough out of him after they lost to Michigan, especially the way that he looked after the game with the flag planting situation. I'm like, I'm not sure about this. And so now you have an opportunity for that guy to go ahead, get a national championship, be at the top of the mountain in college football, where, a little bit over a month ago, people were done with him, right? Like, I think that's interesting. Flip side of that is, I know a lot of folks that are still kind of looking and saying, well, you made it this far. If you come up short, like, it's still going to feel very weird when we talk about the 2024-25 season for him. And then you flip it over to Marcus Freeman, super young dude, right? Like, got the job. A lot of people were asking the question, like, have we gone too far with giving these young dudes who don't have any head coaching experience these big jobs? And then we see some of the losses, Marshall and NIU. And I think people kind of lost faith. Like, maybe Marcus did get this opportunity too early. And now he's got Notre Dame in a position to win a championship, first time in over a decade, and their first championship in my lifetime, right? Like, this is monumental stuff. And so I think that matchup, just from the standpoint of making these guys careers potentially, is really intriguing to me.
Yeah. First of all, my lifetime as well. Not that much older than you. So just wanted to clarify that for our listeners.
I'm saying that not because of you, for the listeners.
Yeah, no, I know. But I just wanted to point out that we're in the same age range. Barely.
We are.
We are.
We're in that band.
It's a narrow age range, but you're an old soul. Sometimes you forget that you're not.
I am. I know. I feel like I've lived this life before.
Listen, I'm with you completely. And it's not a surprise, right? That a national championship, like, it affects legacies. It affects, what you are in your career and in a sport forever. It's very hard to get to this point. It's very hard to win it. And I do think we will talk about the coach that wins it differently. Certainly if it's Ryan Day and everything that he's accomplished. I've already said, the idea that I had that it was, going to be like impossible to move forward and get through the next 11 months before the next Michigan game, that does not feel the same way anymore. I think, obviously you'd want to win that game, that people in Columbus expect Ohio State to be contending for Big Ten and national titles and beating Michigan. So, that's good to do. But I feel very differently about him as a coach in big games since that game and what we've seen since, the preparation, the way that he's handled the actual games themselves, the in-game moments, and all of that. But outside of that, Marcus Freeman, we already know, opportunity to become the first Black head coach to win a national championship at the FBS level. Same for as a coach of Asian descent. Like, there's a lot at stake there for, history and firsts, which has gotten a lot of publicity and a lot of conversation. But just to be 39, to be, the opportunity to win a national championship, already one of the faces of the sport, but like the platform changes when you have a national championship next to your name. It's all really, really interesting and really compelling. We'll get back to this. The coaches themselves also want to get into Marcus's ties to Ohio State. We'll do that a little bit later in the show, but let's start previewing the actual game itself. And I want to start with the quarterbacks. So you've got Will Howard and Riley Leonard. These are both transfer quarterbacks. They both were essentially available at the same time last year. And Notre Dame picked Riley Leonard. That was like telegraphed, right? I think it was a do not contact tag in the portal. They knew that they were going to get Riley Leonard. Will Howard took a little bit longer to land at Ohio State, but they have both been really, really good in their new systems. I think you could argue for both. It took a minute. Certainly, I think for Will in the spring, there's still a lot of, Devin Brown was still getting reps in spring ball. And at the spring game, I think there were still people like, all right, where's that Will Howard that, you're so excited to get? But he has been really terrific as of late. Got great chemistry with those receivers that we'll get into a little bit later for Ohio State. And, just overwhelming amount of numbers, right? Almost, 3,800 pass yards, completing 72.6% of his passes, 40 total touchdowns. He does have 10 interceptions, and some of them have come at inopportune times, as we've seen throughout some of Ohio State's big games. And then Riley Leonard, he has been terrific mostly as a runner, right? 866 rushing yards. He's accounted for 35 total touchdowns. We've wondered all season, what if they need to win a game on his arm? It hasn't happened. They haven't fallen behind enough where that's become an issue. And it just like he has endeared himself, I think, to the entire nation, the way that he has handled this, the way that he is fearless. He's just kind of like always throwing his body for a couple of extra yards. But both of these quarterbacks have fit the place really well, which I think is really cool. And Ryan Day was talking about Will Howard after the Cotton Bowl because he was sitting at a press conference and he had Jack Sawyer next to him and Will Howard. And everyone was talking about Jack Sawyer and this kid who grew up right outside of Columbus, who dreamt of, playing in a national championship game for the Buckeyes. First player to commit to Ryan Day when he was elevated as the head coach. First player last year to commit to coming back and putting us all together. So Ryan's talking about how much Jack Sawyer's meant to him and how he's like a part of his family. And, no one cares about like the Buckeyes more. Like this kid like bleeds it. And then he talks about Will Howard and how it's kind of crazy to think it's only been a year that he's been there because of how he's fit into the place and how much it all means to him. And you see that, right? Like he put out the little cigarette, right? When they beat Indiana, he got real in on the conversation around Ohio State, Michigan week. Like he has embraced all of the parts about being at Ohio State in like a very short compressed time frame. As he's grown more and more comfortable in the offense. So it's a really interesting quarterback matchup because I think the question of like, which one's a better quarterback is different than which quarterback do you trust like in crunch time. I think it's different because I think Will Howard's definitely the better quarterback. But Riley Leonard's just got like something in him where like, if it's a fourth down to decide the game, I think I trust Riley Leonard more.
Riley Leonard is a ball player, right? Like he's a guy that you want to have in your corner because like to your point, when it's crunch time, he's gonna do whatever it takes to try to make a play. I think Will Howard is that guy as well for Ohio State. It's just a different skill set where it's like, what is that thing that he has to do? With Riley Leonard, it's like if he's got to pull the ball down and try to break 4 tackles, we've seen him do that before. I do think it's really interesting for both of these guys coming in. I think the transfer quarterback, and especially when you're transferring into a team that believes they're a contender, is a weird spot. And I think being a quarterback is more than just having the arm, the command of the offense, and the knowledge of the playbook. I think you got to be a guy. Like, I think you got to be the dude in the locker room that people say that they want to play for. And when I was at Ohio State, we had JT Barrett, who was very much that guy, and certainly limited with the arm, was a great runner, but like just made plays for us, and we felt like we could follow behind him. And when Cardale stepped in, he had that type of moxie as well. But those guys had been in the program. We had gotten to know them. These dudes stepping in is crazy. And like from the Ohio State standpoint, Will Howard, it's almost like, we in our group chat, we had folks who made the comment like, well, who does this guy think he is? He hasn't been around all that long. And my response was always, he thinks he's a quarterback at Ohio State, and this is what he has to do for the team to be successful. And I think he believes that, and I think the guys buy into it. So watching them both as leaders, I think, has been the fun part about this.
Agreed.
Now, to the question of the game, it is really interesting. I do think Notre Dame against Penn State was in that spot where they had to throw it to try to get back into it a little bit. But it was Steve Angeli that went in and did a great job and only had one incompletion on that drive where it set them up for the field goal, right? So, like,
yeah, that was a really pivotal moment, right? In the season for Notre Dame.
But to your point, it wasn't Riley Leonard, right? Like we didn't watch him do that. It's such an interesting thing when it comes to these quarterbacks. So to answer the question, it's really hard for me not to believe in Will Howard in the way that he's played so far. But if Notre Dame gets the game that they want, which is the game that they've pretty much played like every point during the regular season after NIU and in critical moments during this postseason, like you got to be scared of Riley Leonard because you know that he's just got that thing where he is going to have his team in the right spot.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point because it is going to come down to the way the game is played, which gets us into the next topic of conversation. Let's start with when Ohio State has the ball. Going a little out of order of our rundown here, but this is kind of where we determine the game and how it is played. And the question is going to be if Notre Dame can stop or slow the 100% firing on all cylinders version of Ohio State, what they're going to do with Jeremiah Smith, because what you do with Jeremiah Smith affects Emeka Egbuka. It affects the rest of the pass game. It affects Travion Henderson. It affects Will Howard. It affects the way the game is played. And if Notre Dame is playing from behind, you know, Ohio State has scored very quickly when it has scored in a lot of the postseason. That was basically the narrative in the Tennessee and the Oregon games. Texas tried something different, right? They really tried to take Jeremiah Smith out of the game. We talked about this a little bit. Like, are you going to sleep better if Jeremiah Smith doesn't beat you, if somebody else beats you, or if, you know, he's able to kind of go off and you limit everything else? Well, they decided, nope, one pass, one completion, 3 yards. That's what we're going to do. Everyone else has struggled with him so far. Notre Dame has an elite defense, a very consistent defense, a defense that, by the way, plays a lot of man, which is going to be very interesting. I'm curious, Joshua, how you think you're going to attack this defense. But like, this is the matchup that we are so excited to see. It's strength on strength, which is Ohio State's pass game and then the back end of Notre Dame's defense. Now, Notre Dame's had a number of injuries throughout the defense over the course of this season, but you've got Xavier Watts there on the back end. He has had impressive and important interceptions, game-changing interceptions for Notre Dame. So has the entire defense. So you know they'll be aggressive at times, but then again, the fundamental piece of this is, can they slow Ohio State enough to give an offense that is run-based, that, you know, isn't going to put up a ton of points, enough of an opportunity to stay in the game. So wherever you want to go on this, but I like cannot wait to see the first time we get Ohio State's offense against this Notre Dame defense.
Yeah, and so I'll look back at the Texas game real quick just to give some perspective. So I know a lot of people were like, "Oh, Texas, you know, they were putting 2 guys on Jeremiah for most of the game." When you watch the tape, the thing that you realize is Texas played a lot of 2 high safety defense, right? Like they played a ton of zones. And so it becomes a little bit harder, and you got to figure out, okay, like what passing concepts do we feel like are the zone beaters? And certainly Ohio State had some. They had the deep shot to Jeremiah early that kind of went through his hands, right? Like they were trying to get him the football and then realized, okay, it might be a little bit more efficient for our offense to get to plan B and plan C. But the idea that Texas said we're going to put 2 defenders on Jeremiah consistently was not the case. They didn't run a ton of brackets. I look at Notre Dame. You mentioned the amount of man-to-man that they run. It's over 50%. It's over 50% is man-to-man. Then they run a lot of cover 3, and then after that is cover 2. But within their man concepts, the thing that they don't do a ton is brackets and double teams, right? So I'm curious if that will change if they want to be a man structure defense, because Texas naturally was a zone structure defense. So within their zone concepts, they could get 2 guys over Jeremiah. For Notre Dame, they're going to have to dictate whether they want to do that. I think it's going to be a really intriguing matchup there. Then I'm curious also when the field gets short, because that's where Texas really got the double teams on Jeremiah, but also those safeties are closer to the line of scrimmage. It's much easier to do that. It's going to be that balance of when they're man-to-man, how are they playing it? Are they using the bracket? Are they just going straight man? And then the other part about it is when they get into their blitz packages, again, a lot of man blitzes, are they going to be a team that says, we're actually going to change the picture a little bit and we're going to go with some zones? And it's not because we're trying to affect Jeremiah as much, but we want to give Will Howard a different picture after the snap, and we want to see if he'll throw us the football. So I think that's going to be a big battle there. It's not just like, what do we do to affect Jeremiah, but it's what do we do to affect this quarterback? And I go back to last year watching Notre Dame and the way that they got into Caleb Williams' head, right? Like, we're talking about best quarterback in college football.
Right? Like, after that,
they did, right? Game. This is the number one pick, and they did everything that man hated in terms of defensive structures, and they made that game miserable. And I think Al Golden is probably sitting there saying, if we're not going to be able to take Jeremiah out because he's that good of a player, I think we might try to affect the quarterback and see if that'll eliminate Jeremiah because the quarterback's not playing well.
That's a really interesting point, because I think a lot of people are focused on, hey, Will Howard can scoot a little bit. We've also seen him like trip when there was no one around him. But this is someone that, again, still has more of an ability to run than maybe other offenses at Notre Dame's face, just based on injuries and who they were playing at different times throughout the season this year. But you're right about Caleb Williams. It's not that long ago. A lot of the same guys. And I think, to your point about Al Golden and where he's been really effective this year, is like figuring out when to do what. And to when to bring the pressure, when to switch up the look, when to try to confuse somebody, because they are really good at taking the ball away and they're really opportunistic. But that all starts from how you're calling the defense and how that's going to work, and why this is a really interesting matchup with Chip Kelly, who we have seen call these games like more aggressively, do a lot of different things. I mean, the issue with the Texas game really was the self-inflicted penalties that were just killing drives. Ohio State could have pulled that game away. They could have had it in hand midpoint of the second quarter if they weren't just like constantly behind the chains over and over and over again. So you still, like, even though that was a close game on paper, it didn't feel close watching it. And so again, like the Chip Kelly piece of this, where you have, great running backs and you have the great threats in the receiving room, like it's such a luxury, and it's kind of a game to figure out how do you position people for the most success.
Okay, so you mentioned the running backs, and I'm glad we got to that point of Ohio State's offense. So Notre Dame, very banged up on the defensive line, and they had guys who were getting hurt throughout the season, and I feel like we haven't talked about that aspect enough. But in this postseason run, they have been banged up on their defensive line. They're not the most stout run defense that you could ever watch. In like, you go back to Penn State, they had some success on the ground. That's what Ohio State is going to have to try to find, right? Like, they're going to have to find creative ways to get the ball into their running backs' hands. That's running the football with creative scheme. But also, can you use them in the pass game as an extension of the run? And I think that could be something that would keep Notre Dame kind of off script a little bit in terms of how they would want to call the game. The worst thing that you could do if you're Ohio State is get yourself into a 2nd and 9 or into a 3rd and 8, because Notre Dame's defense is going to be phenomenal when it comes down to those situations, because it plays into their secondary, which is the strength of their defense. If you keep it into that 2nd and 3, 3rd and 3 or 4, now all of a sudden we're looking at maybe a little bit of a different game script for Notre Dame when they're trying to call their defense.
No, it's a really good point, especially that first half of the Penn State game, very seared into memory of how well they were able to run the ball against Notre Dame. Notre Dame is extremely banged up along the defensive line throughout the season. They've had season-ending injuries, and then Riley Mills goes down against Indiana. They're also really banged up on the offensive line. So let's flip it over to Notre Dame having the ball, Ohio State's defense, which, we talk so much about their offense. It doesn't always get the same level of credit. I think it did after the Cotton Bowl because of what Jack Sawyer did, what Caleb Downs did, and Jim Knowles got that credit. But let's start with that Notre Dame offensive line. It's kind of held together by like duct tape at this point. They have had a number of different guys in and out, guys playing through injuries. We're at the point in the year where someone who was out for the year in the preseason is now back and possibly starting in the national championship game. It's been that long of a season. But despite all of that, to date, Notre Dame has been able to run the ball enough. We have, Jeremiah Smith in the second half of the Orange Bowl was able to get going. Riley Leonard, we've talked about him just throwing himself across the line of scrimmage to get yards. So it's certainly possible that this becomes a factor in this game, but it's pretty impressive, Joshua, how they've been able to manage all of the different injuries of the offensive line and still have such a great run game.
Yeah, I'm totally there with you. And that's a credit really to, number one, the offensive line coaching, right? To feel confident in your run game when you got to roll guys through there. But number two, the backfield is very good for Notre Dame, right? Jeremiah Love, really good player, even with the knee injury. Jadarian Price has been a guy who they can give the ball to and know they can get some tough yards. And then, of course, Riley Leonard makes it very difficult as a defense trying to figure out what you're going to do to defend the extra gap and the extra player. That adds a little bit of just a wrinkle into their game plan there. I do think it's interesting looking at the path for Ohio State. So they play Tennessee and they knock out the running back. And then they play Oregon and they knock out the running back. And these knockouts are coming from the secondary. Lathan Ransom is out there looking like Ed Reed, like just coming down and smacking people at the line of scrimmage. And even with Arch Manning on his one carry, got smacked and then disappeared. We didn't see the guy again. Almost fumbled the ball on the hit. All that to say, there's one game left, so you do anything to get the win. Riley Leonard, I think, is going to have to kind of manage his body a little bit more in this one, the way that Ohio State's defense has been hitting guys who are carrying the football. But I think that's the game right there for me when Notre Dame has the ball. I mentioned all of the times during the regular season where Ohio State had struggled with quarterbacks that like to run the football. I think that is one of the things that becomes really difficult for them. And I went back and watched even more. Even against Marshall, they had trouble with the quarterback run game, right? Like Dylan Raiola, who is not a runner, was a guy who figured out how to be a runner against Ohio State's defense. They have to have a plan, airtight, for what they want to do with Riley Leonard. And I think it's probably going to be Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs. They've let those guys roam a little bit. They've let them get aggressive coming toward the line of scrimmage a little bit. I think those are going to be the ones that end up having to handle the quarterback run game.
Yeah, and again, I just want to circle back on the pass game too, because we have not seen a game that needed to be decided by Riley Leonard's arm. We have not fallen down 14-0, 21-0, something like that, the hole that they need to dig out of where they can't run it. We talked about the Steve Angeli drive, which maybe saved the season. It completely changed the game in the Orange Bowl, but also the receivers, right? So Jaden Greathouse was able to essentially, really impact the game. I was going to say take over, but not quite. But, he became that type of receiver that could change the game. And in a game where both groups, Penn State and Notre Dame, had questions about that group. These are not Ohio State receivers. These aren't really close to them. They're not future pros. But what can they do to, get the third down play and convert or go up and make a contested catch? They are really good at, they again, collectively, Notre Dame has had some big catches. Like they have made contested catches. They have made them in tight spaces. And they've done what they needed to do to either extend drives, to get first downs, to get touchdowns, like to get the points when they needed them. And it'll be interesting to see if they can do that against, again, an elite defense, but one that, again, is going to be focused on stopping different things. And maybe you're not as worried about the receiving room if you're Ohio State looking at Notre Dame's. But again, like they were able to do just enough when they needed to against Penn State. So that's where you've got some questions on, who could step up there? Could Jaden Greathouse again have another big game, but be that opportunity for Riley Leonard? Because, again, in some of their games, especially when they have a lead, like they have hit some big pass plays over the course of this season. I don't know if they'll be able to do it against Ohio State, but as you're looking for ways in a game that has it's like an 8.5 point spread right now, you're looking for ways to Notre Dame to stay in the game. These are some of the areas that are going to be very interesting, because otherwise, it's certainly possible that Jim Knowles' defense gives Riley Leonard the worst day he's had all season.
Yeah, it's interesting though, right? Like, because you start to look at the skill group, and it's like, okay, Jordan Faison has come in and he's made some plays as a guy who's like, very fast, hard to bring down. You mentioned Greathouse, who I believe should have been the offensive MVP of the semifinal game. I thought 100%. He was phenomenal there. You got Bo Collins, who is just like a longer receiver. And we saw what he did against Georgia. They get the ball in a short field, run an RPO. The dude screaming there on a contested catch and gets the touchdown. And then Mitchell Evans, the tight end, who I think is a very good player, who's also from the state of Ohio. So who knows if he felt like he should have had an Ohio State offer coming out of high school or whatever the case might be there. Like it's not a group that you just forget about, right? Like their offense hasn't really been geared toward, let's see how much we can throw those guys the ball. But in situations and with opportunities, they have players that can be very dangerous. So I do think Ohio State can't just walk in there and be like, oh, stop the run, we're going to win the game. Like, no, they got really good players. It's Notre Dame football, right? Like, might not be the game plan to try to get them the ball all the time, but they can be dangerous if you give them an opportunity to.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that's another thing that we've learned over this run is, Notre Dame that would struggle in these postseason games or struggle in matchups against SEC type teams, which, we could put Ohio State's roster in that category. They were always outclassed. They were always outmatched. They're not, right? They have the athletes. They have the skill to make this a game, to potentially win this game, even though Ohio State is the heavy favorite coming into this as well. I also apologize for the dog barking in the background if people can hear it. Red has his thoughts as well about the matchup. But let's get back to the coaches here, because we were talking about what's at stake for them, both winning a first national championship. This is Ryan Day's 6th season as the head coach at Ohio State, 3rd season for Marcus Freeman. Talked about Marcus Freeman's age 39, playing for a national championship. And this is a team that, and a program that has had a lot of national championships in its past, not in a while, not since '88. But it's weird. The 3rd year has been a year of magic for these coaches in Notre Dame history, either winning a national championship or playing for it, which is crazy. But the amount of pressure and expectation and the way that, Notre Dame is and the schedule and all of these things to be doing that in year 3. But this is a coach who has lost some of those bad games. Marshall, NIU, heard a lot about them, but he's also elevated and been great in big games. He's prepared his teams well. He's coached them well. He's kind of like, he's got the pulse of his team really closely. Like he's just really able to manage all of that. And then Ryan Day has taught us a lot over these last 3 games about the response from this team, the response from him to the Michigan game, the way they evaluated it, the way that they addressed their own issues within it, the way they've been more aggressive with the play calling. And then you've got to think that they're going to be thinking, hey, Notre Dame will view themselves similar to Michigan, right? An elevated Michigan. So what did we learn from that game? What did we learn from the way Texas defended us, the way Texas played us? And how do we prepare for this? Like, that Ryan Day is sitting in there and they are working through that chess match right now. But it's going to be a great test of that, of what, the full circle moment, right? If we talked about, does this team go on this run if they don't have the Michigan game go the way that it did? Well, here you're playing a team that, again, you've got the offensive limitations or the pass game limitations, but Riley Leonard's still better than what Michigan had. You've got great future pros on the defensive end. They've also had some injuries, but there's going to be a lot of similarities. So it's such a great test of, well, what did you really learn from losing to Michigan?
No, I'm there with you. And it's going to be one of those where I'll say this, and I said this before, I think maybe last time we talked, but the way that I look at Ryan Day right now, is completely different than the way that I looked at him at the end of the regular season, where regardless of the outcome here, just the path that they had to take to get to the national championship game, I feel like he's a different guy than I thought he was, right? So I'm cool there. I do think there's still that lingering pressure, though, of this is it. We had 3 goals, and this is the last one. It's the one that can make everything feel right, but we kind of do have to get it. And I think going into the first game against Oregon, were things maybe a little bit tight for Ohio State, knowing that was going to be a big game. And against Michigan, certainly things were tight, knowing that was a big game. And so it's there's that mental battle for him of not only what did we learn, but okay, now things are real tight again. Do I get back into my old shell or do I just coach the way that I've been coaching the last 3?
So I would completely agree that I think that he's got pressure. I don't even think it's lingering. I think it's a different type of pressure now. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit similar the way that we talked about the semifinals, where they were big favorites against Texas. And it was sort of okay, well, now everyone's expecting you to do this again. How do you do it? And I feel similarly about the national championship game, because to your point, the 3 goals are beating Michigan, winning a Big Ten title, winning a national title. You lost to Michigan, which cost you the Big Ten title. This is it. And everyone has said all year long, national championship or bust. Well, now we're actually here. So Ryan's talked about this where it's like, well, we expected to be here. We expected to be playing in the playoff. We expected to be having these opportunities. It did not look the way that we thought to get here, but we're here. So how then do you perform when you are at the phase and the point that you and everyone else expected you to be, and now you are the favorite to win it? You're going up against a very depleted team, a team that has a lot more limitations offensively. You think you have a great defense as well. You think you've got, this once in a generation player in Jeremiah Smith, and you've got all these other weapons around him. There is certainly pressure. Again, I don't think it's like hot seat pressure, but there is pressure to finish this and to win the game. And to quote Ryan Day, he's been saying their story's not told and they need to win it to finish that story. There is definitely pressure with that, where with Marcus Freeman, it'd be awesome if you win a national championship. This Irish team has been incredibly fun. They've been likable. We've talked about this. If you're a neutral, you're probably pulling for Notre Dame because Riley Leonard's super likable. Marcus Freeman's super likable. They seem cool, right? They got cooler when they hired Marcus. But it feels a little bit more like they're just kind of playing with house money here. Nobody really thought that they could win a national championship. And certainly they didn't think it after week 2.
No, I'm with you. And I think that puts this game into an interesting spot just in terms of what the preparation is going to feel like for either team. And then ultimately when they get into the game, and we've seen Marcus do this throughout the playoff run, but the chances that you're willing to take, knowing that it's okay, well, maybe we didn't think that, this was going to be the way that our season was going to end. But now that we're here, we want to make sure that we can end it the right way. I will say this though, for Marcus Freeman going up against Ohio State, the place where he played, I do think that there is this unique challenge that he's thinking about. So James Laurinaitis, one of his best friends in the world, was coaching with Marcus Freeman not all that long ago. He's coaching linebackers at Ohio State.
They were in each other's wedding.
Yes. Brian Hartline's another one of those guys, right? There's familiarity there. And so, it's almost like a sibling rivalry where you love and respect these people, but you also want to beat the hell out of them when you get a chance to. But there was the past 2 years where they went into the horseshoe and they kind of got handled. It wasn't a high scoring game or anything, but Ohio State definitely was in control of that one. And then there was the one last year in South Bend where I bet you they were kicking themselves after that game. They had multiple opportunities to win it, dropped interceptions toward the end of the game, the 10 men on the field where Ohio State got that walk-off touchdown. Those things linger in their mind. And so I do think there's this idea of the get back in the one that got away from a year ago. Can we get that thing right in this game? So I do think even though it's probably the team that feels like they're playing with house money, it's hard to avoid that there are going to be these emotions for Marcus because of the history and the familiarity with some of the personnel over there that he really, outside of just being a championship coach, he really would want to get this one.
Right. And it's a great point that, there is a unique element of here of you get to play for your first national championship, but it's also against your alma mater, some of your best friends, and the place that you started your coaching career, which is when I know you spent some time with him when he was a GA at Ohio State. It's going to be fascinating. Again, this is the narrative bowl. It's awesome. There's so much to talk about. These teams coming off of, again, 2 of the worst losses that we saw all season, getting to this point, what it means for the 12-team playoff. You could talk about this endlessly all day. But I do want to end our show with an honorary WTF moment, or just a WTF moment, we'll call it. So as we all remember from last year when these 2 teams played, Lou Holtz had some comments in the pregame, or I guess in the days leading up, he might've gone on the McAfee show.
I think it was the Friday before.
The Friday before. And Ryan Day was really heated about what people were saying. And I remember we were in the green room. We were like, what did people say? What were the comments? And it was Lou Holtz talking about how he didn't believe, he thought that Ryan Day's program and teams were soft, right? Essentially, that they just weren't tough, whatever. So after Ohio State wins that game on the 10 men on the field incident, but they win the game, they walk off. Ryan Day gives us that amazing college football meme when he was talking to our Catherine Tappan, and he's like, I want to know where Lou Holtz is right now, right? So here, let's fast forward a season. And Ryan Day got asked about this earlier this week. He said that he and Lou Holtz have not talked. They have not cleared the air, which, by the way, I love. We love the petty in this sport. And then Lou Holtz, like for some reason, gets on Twitter, quote tweets someone talking about him and like, his feelings about the game, how he might not be able to go because of some, health issue. And he tweets, if Notre Dame doesn't win, it's because we want to preserve Ryan Day's job. I was originally going to go to the game in spirit, but now I'll be dragging my body along as well. Like, wild thing to tweet, wild to just hand, some ammunition, some locker room, whatever, some material, bulletin board material for Ohio State. Had to check. This read like a parody tweet. It's his real account. Like, this is actually Lou Holtz. Yes. There's that much bad blood. But it's wild because, like, wouldn't you immediately print that and put it literally everywhere in the Woody? Like, what are you doing, Lou Holtz?
Yeah, you could use it as bulletin board material. But then again, it's like, here's this dude who is basically at the point where he's like, I have to drag my body to this game because, like, I'm old and I'm going through some things. I think he might have been in a car accident. I don't want to speak out of turn here, but like legitimately going through some things, not to make light of that. But like he himself said, I have to drag myself to this game. It's like, yeah, it is bulletin board material. I don't know if that's bulletin board material I'd want to use. It's hilarious that Lou Holtz is this petty in his old age because that's me. When I'm old, I want to be this petty. I want people to go on Twitter and be like, is this a Joshua Perry burner or is this the real old man up there tweeting? And I'll say this is the last thing. The funniest part about that was he gave his picks and previews for the semifinals, and he spoke glowingly of Ohio State. He was like, I think it's going to be a close game early, but Ohio State is too good and too physical for Texas and will pull away at the end of the game. Like a complete 180 from last year where he's like, they're not physical, they're not tough. He admits that this is a tough physical team and still gets on Twitter and is like, well, if Notre Dame doesn't win this one, it's only because we're trying to make sure Ryan Day's employed next year. Lou Holtz is a madman. He's absolutely crazy.
This is such a great heel turn too for him. But it's so funny because I think we all realized a couple of rounds ago that this was setting up for like the Lou Holtz Bowl. We were potentially going to get Notre Dame and Ohio State again. So here's hoping that I think his broken leg or whatever he's got does allow him to be there. I think it would be very funny and interesting to watch whatever interactions or dynamics could come into play with that. But did not have that on the bingo card that Lou Holtz would be tweeting and kind of igniting a little bit, even more of a fire under a national championship matchup with Ryan Day and his personal feud. Hilarious. It's great. We love the petty. We'll see what happens. I cannot wait for this game. I'll be heading to Atlanta very soon. Excited to be on site to get to watch this thing and to watch a bunch of future pros banging around on the field. And we are going to stay up late on Monday night, Joshua. Yes. We are going to give you guys an instant reaction pod, so it'll be there for you Tuesday morning, which is a different timeline for us. So be sure to subscribe, follow the pod, all the things you need to do so that you'll get it first thing when the game is over and when you wake up the next morning. So for Joshua Perry, I'm Nicole Auerbach. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
We got to make picks, Nicole. What are we doing?
We have to do picks. Okay.
All right. Picks.
Okay. All right. Okay. You want to go first?
So yeah, I'll give this interesting note to end before I give my pick. But last couple teams to beat Ohio State in national championship games, Florida with Urban Meyer at the helm. Urban Meyer, an Ohio guy, born in the state of Ohio. Then you had LSU beating Ohio State for a national title. Les Miles was the coach from Elyria, Ohio. And so now you got the coach from Huber Heights, Ohio, for Notre Dame. Can he be the one? It seems like standing in the way in these title games have been coaches from the great state of Ohio. All of that to say, Ohio State's winning and they're covering the spread in this one. They're going to be national champs.
Okay. Well, I agree with you that Ohio State is going to win a national championship. You will no longer be the most recent national champion for this program.
I know. Crazy.
It is crazy. We're getting old. I want to be a little bit different than you, so at least we're rooting for slightly different outcomes. So I will say that Notre Dame will cover and keep it close. I would also love to see a close game. I'd love to see a great game to cap it all off. So yeah, let's take Notre Dame in the points, but Ohio State to win. That will be the official prediction that we almost didn't get to, but good catch there, Joshua. We will be back late Monday night. We will get you all caught up, give you quick analysis, and I will give you the scene from the post game in Atlanta. Can absolutely not wait for this one. Joshua, it's been a pleasure to do these all season. Excited to do it once more to wrap it all up when we get through this final game of the year. Enjoy it. This is our last college football game for many, many months. I wish the best to you and to all of our listeners. Thank you